In this video, we will be replacing the rear brake pads on a 2016 ER6N. Here's a tip: I use a block of wood and put it underneath the stand whenever I try to mount the bike on a paddock stand. It just makes it easier to line up the stand with the rear spool so I don't have to worry about misalignment, which can make me drop the bike. There are two 6mm Allen bolts you need to unscrew to release the brake caliper from the bike. They are screwed on pretty tightly and a lot of force is needed to get them loose, so I used a green cloth to protect the swing arm from possible scratches or dings. I still tried to loosen them by hand, but they were really tight, so I used a socket extension to get better leverage, but even then it was still hard to loosen the bolt. You also want to be careful when you do this because you don't want the tool to accidentally slip and scratch the bike or ding it. Moving on to the second bolt, I realized that it's better to use the Allen key with a longer stem going into the bolt. This way you don't hit any part of the brake caliper when the bolt gives. After removing the bolts, you can then shimmy the caliper off the rotor disc quite easily. These are the pads you'll be replacing, and this is part of the caliper that one of the pads are attached to. And this is the bolt rod that you have to remove to be able to take out the pads. It has a pin that holds it in place, and you can use a socket head to reveal that pin. Then you can use a pair of long nose pliers to pull it out. Make sure to keep this pin safe because you'll be using it again. Now, to take out the rod, you can use a pair of pliers to slowly shimmy it out. You'll find that it's stuck in there pretty good, but with a little patience, it'll eventually come out. After taking out the rod, the pads easily come off. So this is the old pad, and as you can see, it's a little rusty but still in good condition. You can push the other pad out from the back to make it easier to pull out. And it's also in the same condition. It's a little rusty but still good. This is the center column that pushes the pads together, causing friction on the rotor disc and making the bike brake. It needs to be pushed back to give room for the thicker pads since the older pads are thinner and closer together. The center column needs to be pushed back so that the new pads don't scrape the rotor disc when not in use. You'll also need to take out the center column, which I wasn't able to film. These are the newer pads I ordered online from Shopee. They are Bendix brake pads, and as you can see, they are much thicker than the older pads. The older pads are thinner due to use, and that is why you need to push back the center column to make space for the newer, thicker brake pads. The next step is to put brake-specific grease on parts that have metal-to-metal contact. The one I'm using is called Ceramycel Brake Parts Lubricant from Bendix. This is the center column, and I'm putting grease on the parts that will contact the back of the brake pad. I just had to make sure that I didn't get any of that grease on my gloves while putting it back in its socket. This is one of the newer brake pads, the one that the center column pushes on. So I'm putting grease in all the sections that would have metal-to-metal contact. I guess this helps with the rusting and for smooth operation of the parts. Putting it back is pretty simple. You just slide it in and push it into place, making sure that it's a snug fit, and you can also push it even more just to make sure that the center column is pushed back. Now I wanted to put the brake caliper down and didn't want to put pressure on the hose, so I put it temporarily on the rotor disc while I work on the other brake pad, just putting grease on it, doing the same thing to the other one, and as soon as you do, it just slips on easily and you can clean it with a cloth. Just make sure that none of the grease goes onto the pad themselves. Now this is the center rod, and I just put grease on it just like the others, and by doing that it should slip in easier than it did coming out. So you just push it in and you turn it so that you can align the pinhole, and once you see the pinhole you can clean it up a little bit and put in the pin. The pin should just slide in, and you can push on it to make sure that it's in there, and you can turn it and hide it to make it more secure so that the pin doesn't slide off that easy. Once that's done, you can then slip the brake caliper onto the rotor disc again. Just shimmy it in and make sure that the Allen bolt holes align. Once you've done that, it's a good idea to get yourself some Loctite and put some on the Allen bolts, and you can finger tighten them for now, and do the same to the other bolt. Just finger tighten them, and then you can use the Allen key to tighten them a little bit more Putting the Loctite on the bolts makes them more secure, and it's always a good idea that when you go to really tighten the bolts down, that you protect the bike just in case you slip or anything happens. At least the bike is protected. So I'm just using the wrench and the socket head just to put more force on the bolts, make sure that they're tight. And the next step would be to pump the brakes, make sure that the wheel is turning freely and that the new pads are not scraping on the rotor disc. That's why it's a good idea to have the bike on a paddock stand, just so that the wheel can turn freely and you can test it, make sure that nothing is scraping against the rotors. Road testing the bike, I just started at slower speeds first, then gradually at higher speeds. The brakes performed really well, a big improvement from the old brakes, so I'm very happy that it all works, and I hope this helps you, and thanks for watching.